Well, good afternoon, fellow constitutionalists, and welcome to the Tuesday edition of the Dan Clements Show, a Christian political talk show. I'm your host, Dan Clements, your constitutional warrior, fighting for your right just to be an American. It is December 12th in the year of our Lord 2017. Remember, we're hyphen-free, PC-free zone. God is still in control, and He does love you. And I'm broadcasting live from the potentially snowy central Susquehanna Valley here in the great Keystone State, sitting before the great John Wayne desk. And I have the window open. And I've been staring out to see what's going on, and nothing's happening so far. We're supposed to drop down. My wife said something about 4 degrees tonight, but I went on the Weather Channel and AccuWeather here for the local forecast. It's only supposed to get down in the teens tonight, and Lord willing, the creeks don't rise. We'll have my new furnace hooked up, the propane furnace. But I won't be unhooking the wood furnace right away because I want to make sure the propane furnace is working the way it's supposed to, and 2, I want to burn up the firewood I have out there before I disconnect that from the house, the outside wood furnace in the house, and hook it into the propane, the piping in the propane, so we're totally on propane. And the one, excuse me, the one reason why I'm looking forward to it. As most of my listeners and watchers of YouTube know, that I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia, and I have issues with energy and muscle aches and pains and stuff like that. And especially late in the evening, I usually try to stay up to 11 o'clock midnight and go out and check the fire and stoke it so it holds through the night, so I can get 6-7 hours of uninterrupted sleep. But when the temperatures drop down in the single digits or below 0, I'm out there every about 4 hours. Feeding that thing, so I'm actually kind of looking forward not to have to do that. So again, I'm just thankful that I was able to do this, to put this new furnace in, and that'll help me out greatly. But tomorrow, real quick note about tomorrow, I won't know till tonight, until like 5:30 tonight, if or when they're supposed to come. I don't think it's going to be in the morning because they had to squeeze me in. And I'm just wondering if it's going to be like at the tail end of the day tomorrow. But I'll find out tomorrow. I'll try to pin them down on a time zone. And if I'm not going to be broadcasting tomorrow, I promise I'll put a little video out just to let you know, because of the propane. I have to be down in the basement in case there's some leaks in my gas lines that I worked. So I have to tighten those up and get those to quit leaking. So we're almost done here at... at the homestead here, and we're not really a homestead. I live out in a little country town, but we're almost done doing some improvements on our house to make life a little bit easier on Lori and I with my condition and her work hours. And I hate to see her go out and check the fire when it's cold out, because she hates the cold, and she's lived in the northern climate all of her life, so and she hates the cold. But we're supposed to be getting snow today. Not much, but we're supposed to be getting some. Supposed to turn colder, get down the teens, lower 20s, upper teens the next couple nights. So that's really going to test out that new furnace, especially if it gets down the teens. So we'll see. We'll see what's going on with it, but I'll let you know about tomorrow. I wasn't going to start getting into the net neutrality today, since it's only Tuesday and the vote doesn't come till Thursday. But I have more than enough material to go over, and not that I'm going to hit real hard on net neutrality today. I'm going to hit that hard tomorrow and Thursday. But I've been doing a lot of research, and there are, I don't really want to call it misinformation, but there are a lot of omissions as far as what's going on. And one big one that I forgot all about when I was doing my research into this was the cost of regulatory compliance by the ISPs. What it costs them in order to be compliant with the FCC rules or FTC rules, whatever. But right now we're working under FCC rules of the open internet, net neutrality. The supporters of net neutrality never talk about the cost of the regulation to the ISP, which they pass on to the customers. Because they inevitably always have to have extra personnel on. Most all companies do to deal with regulations. Like when I was working at Mohawk Flush Doors, they had one person And all that person did was to make sure that the plant was EPA compliant. But it wasn't, they just didn't pay that one person. They also had consulting firms that they hired to help them out. They also had EPA, I'm not sure if it was a law firm, but I think it was a law firm through Masonite. They had them on retainer in case they got in trouble or they had some legal questions about it. So there is a huge cost in regulation, and like I said, I don't think they're being misleading, because I should have thought of this myself a little earlier on. But I do think they leave this out. They omit these type of facts because it doesn't fit into their narrative. And whether they're doing it on purpose or not, I can't speak to that. You'd have to talk to the folks that are actually, reporting these things. I've been watching some of these videos, and they make it sound good. They make it sound like net neutrality is the next best thing since sliced bread. And when you start talking about regulations and stuff like that, then they go off the rails. And so I titled the show today, Regulations Create Monopolies and Oppression. And what do I mean by that? Well, net neutrality does nothing to get rid of the last mile monopolies that a lot of local ISPs, and folks, I've been doing some research, and there are thousands. There are multiple thousands. I haven't even found the accurate number yet, but there's multiple thousands of ISPs all across the country. Small last mile ISPs I found out a lot of last mile ISPs are wireless. They're going Wi-Fi. They put up like Wi-Fi repeaters. And normally they rent space off of a radio tower or something like that to get their signals across. So I'm having a little issue with my cord here. I got to figure out how I'm going to do all this stuff on with my chair and everything, with my headphones. I don't like wearing the big headphones anymore. But anyway, I found out a lot of these ISPs are very small. Some of them net neutrality really hasn't affected them. Others say it has, and the one that, like I said, that I forgot about was the cost of regulation. And they were saying, and I'm still looking, I think I'll have that story on tomorrow's show. I have them split up. But if I come across it today on today's show, I'll let you know. But they only have, multiple thousand customers, and they're not a real big ISP. I think they had something like 20,000 customers or something like that. That's really not that big of an ISP. But they estimated their cost, yearly cost of complying with the FCC regulations to make sure they were in compliance was like $40,000. Because they had to hire extra people, and again, a consulting firm to make sure they were following the rules right, and probably have a lawyer on retainer just in case something, and there's law firms that specialize in these different government regulations. They make their living off of this, and that costs money. And guess who pays for that in the end? The consumer. The consumer. So regulations do create monopolies. The net neutrality never did remove any of the local monopolies that, like Comcast, Verizon, AT&T. They're the big three that they're talking about. One of the other points that's really sticking on my craw about some of these videos out there are, I was watching one yesterday, the Humanist Report, and I'll put a link in the show notes page down there. He gave a couple examples of some ISPs that were expanding, and saying, look, see, we got a couple ISPs that are expanding, so net neutrality is not stifling investment. I have an article today. If we get to it, we'll talk about it. If not, it'll be tomorrow. But I have an article here from the Free State Foundation Blogspot. It's a blog. It's by Michael Hornet. It's broadband investment slowed by $5.6 billion since open internet order in May 2015. $5.6 billion is a significant amount of money that has been slowed down. And what they did was, and they did a good job, researching this and seeing where the historical trends were with the internet leading up to this, and how investment dropped off, a total in the past couple of years since May 2015, $5.6 billion. That's a lot of lines. That's a lot of maintenance, upgrades, stuff like that. So I think it's disingenuous to look at two examples and say, here, these companies invested, and got more customers, which is great. I'm glad they did. But to extrapolate that out, saying, see, the investments are going on even with net neutrality, and that's just not the case. Because when you're talking about things like this, you got to use industry wide. I mean, you got to use the whole country, and there may be, even in that $5.6 billion of slowdown since May of 2015. Yeah, you're always going to have a couple outliers that are still going to invest, and hope against hope they'll be able to survive the government-created monopolies at the local level. And sometimes the only way to do that is to expand your base, so you have more customers and you can have more clout, as it were. So there's a couple things going on here about this, but the big glaring issue with the pro net neutrality folks is their misguided ideology about regulations, that government regulations are good. And look, folks, we only have to point back to the past couple days, talk about yesterday. The New York City bomber, I got an article I want to read to you about this. The New York City bomber is beneficiary of chain migration and the Visa lottery program. Two of the dumbest immigration programs we have, because there's very little vetting in any of these. And what makes me mad is we have Americans that are protesting about us trying to vet immigrants coming in this country and trying to, and just outright banning from some countries entrance into the United States based on their terror ties that they have. And I don't understand that mentality. Other than, in the past I said, it seems to me that the left wants to destroy America the way it is. The left does not like people having freedom and liberties. And one of the ways to do that is to destroy institutions like marriage, and supporting gay marriage in that, destroy the morality of the country by supporting humanism and all the institutions that fall underneath that umbrella of humanism. And so I can't help but think that there's a concerted effort in our country to destroy America as we know it. And folks who believe that the government can regulate the internet better than the free market can are just fooling themselves. I have another article talking about a brief history of, let me see who's got this down here. Net neutrality violations, a brief history by Timothy Carr over at freepress.net. We'll try to get into that today. It goes back to 2005, and a lot of, not all, but the vast majority of these violations were made by internet cell providers. You got your cell companies, these cell companies that had to put extra equipment in wherever their signals are going to be processed in order for people to hook up to the internet. And they've been doing that for a long time with text messaging and stuff like that. But they've had to invest and expand things. Well, during that time of expansion, if you look at the history close enough, during that time of expansion, in order to allow everybody to have a little bit of the internet until they could catch up, till technology could catch up with the bandwidth requirements of its users, they had to throttle things back and limit bandwidth use, on a monthly basis. And people were crying, what people tell me, cry me a river. These people are crying a river of tears over this. And we live in such an instant gratification society today that these people, these whiners, couldn't wait until the companies, the cell phone carriers, caught up with the demand. I'm pretty sure it almost seems to me like they got caught off guard. Now, maybe they should have been more forward thinking, and I agree with that, but the facts are they got caught off guard. So a lot of this throttling and bandwidth caps were done by the internet providers that also were the cell phone providers. Comcast is one of the biggest abusers, I guess, what they say. But every instance before net neutrality, FTC, made the right decision, and Comcast couldn't do this, and this company couldn't do that, and it just, again, the regulations, the watchdogs we have, to make sure, like the FTC, to make sure the competition's fair, it worked. They were working, and the only reason to have net neutrality is so you have a set of regulations on the books, and this is the funny thing, there are just as many, if not more, tech companies that are for getting rid of net neutrality than there are that support net neutrality. And yet these, they're being demonized. They're being called corporate fascists, which doesn't even make any sense. It's just corporations technically are not in charge of our country. I know it may seem like it sometimes with all the lobbying money that goes into Washington, D.C., but folks, the money that goes to Washington, D.C. through lobbyists is a pittance compared to the gross domestic product of the United States. So corporations do not control Congress. They don't control the president. Do they control some members in there? Yes. Do they get some favored legislation in there? Yes. Has there been crony capitalism in our country for a long, long time? Yes. I used to talk, I still talk about it. But I give the example of the oleomargarine manufacturers in the late 1800s. And I didn't want you to be without a link to this. So I have a link in the show notes page today that talks about the war on margarine and how the New York State dairy farmers went to the government and got regulations in place to stifle the oleomargarine manufacturers' marketplace share. Stifle the competition. Because they couldn't keep up with what the oleomargarine folks were doing. And back then, even today, they're not, I read this one Facebook post that said, if you're using margarine, you're one chemical away, or one whatever away from it being plastic. And why would you want to put that in your body? And we use and this isn't a product endorsement, but we use a spread called Imperial. And all I ever read on that is oils. Regular natural oils that you find, in nature. And, it does have some whey in it, some milk whey in it, and that gives it, I guess that gives it the buttery flavor, and I like Imperial margarine. But it's a cheaper alternative to butter. I mean, I can buy a lot more margarine for the same amount that I pay for a pound of butter. And we do keep butter at the house. I like butter on my toast and butter on other things. But for general cooking and stuff like that, we use, margarine. But back in the 1800s, there was corporatism going on back then, where a company got together with the government to stifle competition. It's no different today. We have groups of citizens who trying to go to the government to regulate other groups of citizens through regulations. I've been told many times on social media that I need my free speech curtailed because people don't agree with what I have to say. And I don't doubt that they're trying to go through their Congress folks to get regulations on like Canada did, that about hate speech, a very, very subjective term. And there are groups all the time trying to use government to stifle the free speech or the freedoms of other American citizens. And to me, that's not right. And honestly, I don't think companies should be allowed to go to the government to get competition stifled. I don't think, and we're talking the federal level here now. I don't think the federal government should have an EPA. Because look at all the damage they've caused. Look at all the multiple millions of dollars of loss that they've caused to landowners because of, this is wetlands now or something like that. And EPA controls it. There was an article I was reading a year ago at least. A farmer had tilled his ground, and it was in a lower lying area, but it wasn't a swampy area, and he'd been farming it for, his family had been farming this piece of ground for, years, 100 years, something like that. And it rained, and the EPA happened to be in the area looking at wetlands, and they seen all this standing water down this plowed field, and they tried to get this field designated as a wetland. And it had just rained real heavy the day before. And it had some standing water out there. Oh, this is a wetland. It took him, it took him thousands of dollars to fight it in court. Yeah, I don't think the automatic should be that government bureaucracy should do anything without first having evidence. Without first having evidence. I mean actionable evidence that a crime has been committed or the regulation's been broke or something like that. Just a simple accusation, oh, we think you did, and you get arrested, you get your property taken away from you, and then you got to fight in court to get everything back. That's racketeering as far as I'm concerned. I mean, the mafia wish they could do that, on the grand scale that our U.S. government does it. So again, I don't understand this fascination with folks have with regulations. That they think the government's going to regulate the market better than the free market can, and it's silly to even think that, because if you go look through the open internet of 2015, what we call net, the quantification of net neutrality that they claim has been a principle throughout the internet's life existency, but it seems strange to me that we didn't hear about net neutrality till the late, probably 2010, 2011, until that term came into popular use. Oh, well, we're just sort of using this term, and it does go back if you really look at the regulations, which it really doesn't. Because net neutrality does not do what people think it's going to do. It's not going to stop Comcast from having its monopoly. And a matter of fact, I was watching some videos this morning about this, or no, last night, and this guy, my business is on YouTube. What happens if they throttle me back? And he said that they shouldn't, I should be able to pay, and this is what this guy was saying, I should be able to pay a monthly fee and just have unlimited bandwidth. And he condemns ISPs, or the last mile providers, that have the different tiers. And I'm like, mine does. And you know what? They're a business. And because I use more bandwidth per month than somebody that just browses the internet every now and then and uses it for email, I should pay more because I'm using more. I'm using more bandwidth. And I've gotten in discussions about that. Well, it doesn't cost them any more to give you 100 gigabytes a month than it does 50 gigabytes a month. So why should they make more money on that? But it does. It's a scaling problem, because electricity is involved. If I use more bandwidth, they have to put more things on. Like I said, I'm going to try to get with Service Electric and maybe sit down with them and do a tour with them and ask them if I can shoot some videos and stuff like that, and have an interview with somebody there about how a last mile ISP actually works, and if nobody's using the internet, does that lessen their electric load, which I'm pretty sure it does, because we had, I had servers where I worked at when I was in dispatch, and the less computers we had on the servers, the less the server was working, because it had, different hard drives and stuff on there. It would drop off, and I'm not exactly sure how servers technically work completely, but I do know they scale back. The less users are on there, the less server you need, and the less power it actually uses. From what I was told from our IT guy, that the servers we had were scalable. The less people on it, the less it uses, the less electricity and everything it uses. And because businesses, servers in this day and age are energy hogs. They use a lot of electricity. But it seems like folks that support net neutrality have no clue about that. They have no clue about running a business. They have no clue about the cost of running a business with the utilities and everything you have. They're in this generation where they want everything for free. They don't want to have to pay for it or pay very little for it and get, you know, take it. The ISPs give an inch and these guys are taking a mile. And I'm not mad at my ISP because they want to charge me more because I want more bandwidth per month because of what I'm doing here. Yeah, I'm trying to run a business here, but you know what? YouTube isn't charging me. They're not charging me. And matter of fact, most of these people they're crying about that have shows on YouTube and are putting out videos, are they getting a bill from YouTube for using their platform? Now, I know YouTube is making money off of advertising and monetization, and I think that's great. And they do share that revenue with their creators. Not as much as they used to, but they do share it. You know, that's their business model. But can you imagine the server farms that YouTube has to have in order to house all these videos? And they're like the second most popular search engine on the internet. You know, so it's, again, it amazes me how little these folks actually know when it comes to regulations, when it comes to creating a business, running a business, the cost of running that business, and everything else. One last note before we get to the commercials here. In some of my reading yesterday about these last mile ISPs, I believe this one was out in California, and they had to deal with a complaint to the FCC because this was just recently. This person wanted internet. They couldn't get the cables out there because they were out in like a remote area, and now the ISP was a Wi-Fi ISP. And they had repeaters up there, and they're actually offering broadband across the Wi-Fi. But the signal couldn't get to this guy's house. And the reason why the signal couldn't get to this guy's house is this guy had trees all around it. Especially, it doesn't necessarily need to be line of sight, but leaves on trees do reflect that. This time of year around here where the leaves are off, my cell phone service out here in Schneidertown is great. Well, when the leaves are on, it isn't. And they actually took meters down there and showed this guy that outside the trees had great signal. They just were not penetrating through the trees. And this guy complained about that. And it would have cost the ISP multiple thousands of dollars to fix that issue for one customer, and it would take them, you know, too many years to recoup that investment to get that one person on, because that one person wouldn't trim back the trees or take out a tree or two so he could get Wi-Fi. So it amazed me. I don't know. I was thinking maybe they could put an antenna, you know, on the edge of the property away from the trees, but for whatever reason, and they didn't get into it, they just couldn't get the Wi-Fi to them. And so the FCC, the bureaucracy that is the FCC or the FTC, that were actually taking these complaints before, you know, net neutrality in 2015, they have to deal with this all the time. You know, and a lot of times I was reading, a lot of times they don't even deal with it. They look at it, they send out a response to it, and they just don't deal with it because some of them are so ridiculous that it isn't even funny. So, and you know, there are people that make decisions where they're going to live based on if they can get broadband or not. There was a nice house, if the dispatch would have went well for me down in Millerstown with the new company, there was a nice house we were looking at out in the country that was like 10 minutes away from the shop. But they didn't have broadband internet there. And the only internet we could get was satellite. And I wasn't going to pay that exorbitant price for HughesNet, you know, if we'd have moved out there. So, you know, there are some decisions I had to make, or me and my wife wanted to make. We were in looking for a place. I had to have cable internet, period. You know, because of my dispatch job, I go home and do dispatching from the house, but I needed high-speed internet to do that. So anyway, let's get into the show here. Look, folks, are you the handy person in the house? Man or woman, doesn't matter to me. Do you fix your power equipment outside, or do you fix the appliances inside? Because a lot of people do that nowadays to save themselves a quick buck if it's something simple. But you look around, you can't find the parts anywhere. Well, I got a solution for you. If you go to the dancolumbusShow.com and click on the Sears Part Direct widget, it'll take you to the Sears Part Direct site, and power equipment, appliances, if they can't get it, it can't be had. And if you use danclemenshow.com and the widget there, there's an offer code there you can put in, give you 10% off your parts purchases, which will cover your shipping, which is a great deal. So what are you waiting for? You got the weekend coming up, you might have something broke down, get the parts on order so you can get them by the weekend so you can get that fixed so you can have it in case you need it. Because it's better to have and not need, need and not have, right? So, the Sears Part Direct is a affiliate marketer partner of mine, and they are sponsoring this hour of the show here with that. So, and if, like I said, if you like what you hear on the show here, please go over to the danclemenshow.com and support my affiliate marketer partners over there. All right, today's daily Bible reading comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 4 through 8. I thank my God always concerning you for the grace of God which was given to you by Christ Jesus, that you were enriched in everything by him in all utterances and all knowledge, even as the testimony of Christ was confirmed in you, so that you came short in no gift, eagerly waiting for the revelation of our Lord Jesus Christ, who will also confirm you to the end, that you may be blameless in the day of our Lord Jesus Christ. I like how Paul talks about you've been confirmed. You were given the grace of God, by Jesus Christ. And he thanks God all the time for this, that the word of Jesus Christ worked in their lives, brought about that repentance, brought about the salvation that mankind so desperately, desperately needs. Today's quote meal comes from W.T. Purchaser. Nothing takes God by surprise. He knows the future and can therefore guide us through its trackless ways. I've heard a lot of people over the years, since I became a Christian, that why did God allow me to go through this? This was a horrible experience in my life that God, he should have just removed me from it so I wouldn't have to go through the hurt and pain. We're not robots, folks. And sometimes if you look back after you went through something hard in your life, something painful, emotionally, physically painful, hopefully you can see, especially if you're a Christian and you put on Christ in baptism, that what you went through made you stronger. It gave you life experiences. If you don't go through anything in life, you won't have any life experiences to draw on, so you can share some of your wisdom, about, well, you know what, one time in my life I put my hand on a electric coil burner on a cook stove, and it hurt like the dickens. So I'm telling you, you don't have to believe me, but I'm telling you, don't do that because it'll hurt. That may be simplified, but that's exactly what I'm talking about. God has never, Lieutenant Matthews told me this way back when I first became a Christian, God has never promised to take you out of the storms of life, but he did promise to lead you through it, that he would lead you through. And that's all I can ask for. That's all I can ask for. God said he was going to lead us through it, and he's going to. Enough said, right? Today's short Bible lesson comes from Jack Wilkie over at focuspress.org. Should churches sing the Christmas hymns? And he's talking about the churches of Christ. We try to model ourselves after the first century church of the Bible, and some people, well, these are, denominations sing these, so we can't sing them. And I think Jack Wilkie does a really good job in this article. I don't believe that in one bit. Matter of fact, we sing Christmas songs even when it isn't the Christmas season. Because they're songs of praise about our Lord Jesus Christ that we offer up to God in our worship to him on the first day of the week. So it's a good article, really good articles over at Focus Press if you want to go over there and get on their mail list and get those articles. All right, first story of the day is the New York City bomber. He was a product of this chain migration in the United States. And this is something that we've talked about on the show before when it comes to immigration and stuff like that. And it just amazes me how many folks here in the United States, again, I said in my monologue, are protesting the travel bans that President Trump signed in as an executive order. And they won't let these animals into our country. I'm sorry to say that they're animals. And they take political correctness to its logical extremes. If you don't agree with me, I'm going to kill you. If you don't believe the way I believe, I will kill you. That's what an Islamist does. And if they're truthful, if they're honest in their assessment of Islam, that's the actual facts of the matter. Because you know what? When was the last time you heard of a Christian terrorist? You know, not all Muslims are terrorists, but it seems lately here almost all terrorists are Muslims. You know, go figure, right? But anyway, the New York City bombing suspect, Akayed Ullah, was a beneficiary of chain migration and indirectly the diversity visa lottery system. And this is a story by Patrick Goodenough over at cnsnews.com posted today. The Bangladesh-born man was who detonated a pipe bomb near Times Square on Monday morning was able to live in the United States because of chain migration and the diversity visa lottery system, two features of the immigration system that the Trump administration wants to end. The Department of Homeland Security confirmed that 27-year-old Akayed entered the U.S. in 2011 on an F-43 fourth preference family immigration visa. That means Ullah was in the fourth and most distant family relationship eligibility category, a minor child of a sibling of a U.S. citizen over 21 years of age. DHS spokesman Tyler Holton confirmed further that the person whose family tie had enabled Ullah to settle in the country had become a U.S. citizen after entering the U.S. through the visa lottery program. President Trump has called for an end to both the chain migration and the visa lottery program. As I have been saying since I was first announced my candidacy for president, America must fix its lax immigration system, which allows far too many dangerous, inadequately vetted people to access our country, Trump said in response to the attack. Today's terror suspect entered our country through extended family chain migration, which is incompatible with national security. Trump called on Congress to act to end the chain migration and advance his administration's other proposals to enhance domestic security, including increasing the number of immigrations and custom enforcement officers, enhancing the arrest and detention authorities for immigration officers, and ending fraud and abuse in our immigration system. So we have this bomber, this New York City bomber, that is a product, or was a product, of chain immigration, and because the folks who he was related to came over on the lottery system. And you have to ask yourself, if we didn't have the lottery system, would this person been here? Would this Bangladeshi man actually been here? You know, you got to ask those questions. I know a lot of people don't like asking those questions, but you got to ask them. There's some questions you just have to ask. And when I heard about the chain migration and the visa lottery program, I said, no. Honestly, I think people should, you know, if you're family coming over here, that's one thing, family and siblings. But that's it. You know, I think if you're going to come over here, you need to come over on your own merits, not on somebody else's. I'm not saying your relatives that are living here now that might have been become naturalized citizens can't help you, but I think you need to come over here on your own merits. You know, I don't know anything about this guy's the family. He's a fourth removed. You know, the last category of the relatives. You know, and I know it's going to come out what kind of folks they are, but you know, they could be just upstanding citizens that you know, I've known some Muslims that have left Islam because they didn't agree with it. They didn't agree with the violence that was going on there, and you know, all sorts of things. So, you know, it'll come out, you know, eventually. But again, this guy here was a beneficiary of chain migration, and again, I think if you're a family and you got kids, you know, coming over, that's one thing, and that should be it. You know, anything beyond that, they need to get over here on their own merits. You know, period. I have another article here from fee.org, and it's entitled, let me get up to it here, Limits on Power are Limits on Oppression. And you might be thinking, well, Dan, what are you bringing this in here for? Limits on power, limits on oppression. And this does have a lot to do with regulations, because regulations, especially anti-competitive regulations, are oppressive. They oppress new entrants into a field. They oppress smaller companies that may be already in the field. I'm talking, let's keep it on a corporation type level here. And so there is, with regulations, there are oppressions. President Obama, his unconstitutional, shutting down of coal plants, coal-fired plants, right? That executive order, that was regulatory oppression, because he was using the power of the EPA to shut down these coal. We have a couple in our area, especially the one over Smoking Dam, a coal-fired electric plant that was shut down with nothing in its place to replace it, which really jumped our electric bill. Every time I think I'm saving electricity around here by getting rid of an electrical appliance, my bill stays the same or goes higher. And it's usually due because of regulations make it more expensive. And so that's what happened when Obama was trying to destroy the coal industry. He was oppressing companies, and he was oppressing employees that couldn't find a job anymore because that's all they had ever done. And so it's very, very oppressive. And with President Obama, it didn't matter to him. We're talking about a couple 100,000 jobs in the coal industry across America, maybe more, maybe less. I think it's somewhere a couple 100,000. So out of the total workforce, you're not talking about that many folks. So, hey, if we make some regulations that put them out of a job, put their companies out of business so they can't hire them, it really doesn't matter, according to Obama. At least that's the idea and the sentiment I got when he talked about that stuff. We'll help them. We got all these different government programs. We can help them retrain themselves. What happens if they don't want to be retrained? What happens if they were perfectly happy doing the job they were doing? And the only reason why they're not doing that job anymore is because of onerous government regulations. So limits on power are limits on oppression. There's no doubt in my mind about this, folks. There just isn't. This is by Gary M. Gales over at Foundation for Economic Education.org. December 19th marks, let me see where this was written on the 8th of this month of this year. On December 19th marks the birth of John Taylor of Caroline, who remains virtually unknown despite being called the most impressive political theorist that America has produced. Taylor, who served in the Continental Army, Virginia legislature, and U.S. Senate, was an anti-federalist opposed to the overpowering central government he believed the Constitution would create. As F. Thornton Miller put it, for Taylor, the Constitution was worth only it could serve the more fundamental cause of liberty. The Constitution was of worth only if it could serve the more fundamental cause of liberty. Taylor defended liberty and states' rights, advocated a strict interpretation of the Constitution's terms against federal overreach, and vigorously opposed government favors and protectionism, which he called the most effectuous system of tyranny practicable over civilized nations. Taylor's positions stand abandoned today. Government has become evermore the dispenser of special treatment at others' expense. This is why Taylor's 1822 Tyranny Unmasked merits revisiting, which I'm going to see if that's still in print or not. I haven't looked that up yet. Political liberty consists only in a government constituted to preserve and not to defeat the natural capacity of providing for our own good. Governments able to do so uniformly sacrifice the national interest to their own. As no government can patronize one class but at the expense of others, it's not their discord It is not their discord the universal consequences of the fraudulent power assumed by governments of allotting the classes and individuals indignance or wealth, payments extorted to feed either an oppressive government or exclusive privileges, denigrate into actual tyranny. The only some of these older words I stumble over because they look like other words I know they're not. The only reciprocity produced by legislative favors is between the corruptors and the corrupted. If a man should combine with a government to take away another's property, the tyranny of the act would not be obliterated by the power of an accomplice. The nation which imagines that government can, by provisions, convert fraud into honesty, relies upon a moral impossibility for the preservation of its liberty. Governments, under pretense of supervising the affairs of individuals, enrich themselves and their instruments of oppression. The treasure extorted beyond the line of honest frugality is uniformly diverted from the end of defending to that of transferring property. The wealth of nations is best secured by allowing every person, as long as he adheres to the rules of justice, to pursue his own interests in his own way. Liberty can only be preserved by frugal government and by excluding frauds for transferring property from one man to another. How then is tyranny to be ascertained, except as something which takes away our money, transfers our property and comforts to those who did not earn them, and eats the food belonging to others? You know, that paragraph right there alone sums up our modern welfare system. And again, let me qualify this. There are folks out there that cannot produce for themselves to be productive citizens as we would know productive citizens. I think family, church, communities, and then finally the state should help out in those situations. But there are a lot of people on welfare that could work and don't. They're able to, but they choose not to, so they sop off the system. And so that's a type of tyranny. I know they're harsh words, but it's a type of tyranny. The transferring policy seems to suppose that the public has no property, and though legislatures have no moral or constitutional right to give one man's property to another, yet that by combining the property of all men under the appellation public, they acquire both a moral and constitutional right to give the property to all men, of all men to one man. There are two kinds of political economy. One consists of a frugal government and encouragement of individuals to earn by suffering them to use. The other of contrivances for feeding an extravagant government, its parasites and partisans, its sinecures and exclusive privileges, one in liberty and the other in tyranny. Government founded upon the supposed necessity that man must be robbed of their property to preserve social order invariably terminates in despotism. You didn't get there alone. You didn't build that by yourself. That's a type of tyranny, folks. A government able to oppress must be weak for the object of preserving liberty. Every innovation which weakens the limitations and divisions of power, alone able to make the government strong for the object of preserving liberty, makes it strong for the object of oppression. John Taylor of Carolina deserves renewed attention, particularly for his overwhelming arguments derived from what Joseph Stromberg termed the contrast between those whose property was the creature of political force and fraud and those who earned their property through productive work on the free market. As F. Thornton Miller wrote, most of Taylor's world is gone, but with the continued increase in the power of the federal government and the pursuit of policies that benefit specific constituencies, the principles set out in the Tyranny Unmasked are as relevant today as they were in 1822. So again, we have another example of how limits on power are limits on oppression. And net neutrality, having an unelected bureaucracy set rules for the private market, is tyranny. That is the definition of government regulation, folks. And through that, oppression can occur, whether it's from the government or whether it's from the crony capitalists that participate in that fraudulent use of government authority that the government shouldn't have to begin with. You know, it's unconstitutional. A lot of these bureaucracies that progressives love, they cannot find them in the Constitution. They cannot find any constitutional controlling authority for them to even exist on the federal level. It's just that simple, folks, and the Constitution is not that hard to read and understand. Go to Article 1, Section 8, and read the enumerated powers. And put them against, read those first, then pick your favorite bureaucracy and read about that bureaucracy and see where it fits in the enumerated powers. I think if you do this honestly, with an open mind, I think you'll be shocked. I think you'll totally be shocked. Now, this next one, like I said, I'm sort of laying the groundwork here today for the rest of the week here, as far as leading up to Thursday and the FCC's vote, which we know they're going to get rid of the 2015 open internet regulations, right? But I've talked about this for years, and I thought, you know what? I said to myself, Dan, yeah, Dan, what do you want? I said, we got to find that article that you first read. And I was racking my brains. I thought I had it in my folders. I did a search in my folders, couldn't find it in my folders on the computer. So I thought, you know what? I read a lot of these things over, especially economic things like this, over at the FEE.org. And sure enough, I went over there and found the exact article I was looking for. And it's called The War on Margarine by Adam Young. And this thing he posted this back in June 1st of 2002, but it's still relevant today. This year marks the 116th anniversary of the Federal Margarine Act of 1866, part of an 80-year war on butter's toughest competitor. The act was the capstone of a movement to prevent consumers from enjoying the cheaper spread, which was introduced in 1874. The advocates of the act and of earlier state laws regulating the packaging and sale of margarine argued they were preventing unscrupulous wholesalers and retailers from marketing margarine as a more expensive dairy butter and duping unwitting customers or consumers. The media and the public generally assume that bureaucracy and regulation are benevolently aimed at making a safer world, but that wasn't the true motivation at all. And it goes down, talks about actual oleomargarine was invented by this, I'm not sure how to pronounce his first name, Hippolyte Maurice. Maurice is his last name. He invented that, and he got a patent on the process in 1869 over in France, and a U.S. patent in 1873. His American patent was bought in 1874 by the U.S. Dairy Company, which went on to introduce margarine to the United States. The company opened 15 factories over the next 7 years, 5 in New York State. It and its subsidiary, the Commercial Manufacturing Company, made both margarine oil and margarine butter, and led the industry with nearly 10% of the market. In 1882, the firm produced 50,000 pounds of margarine butter a day, and more than half the 20 million pounds annually produced in New York State alone. So it wasn't about, and this is where the argument for net neutrality, I think, goes off the rail. The dairy farmers weren't arguing this apples to apples. They saw a threat to their butter monopoly, as it were. I can't say that without a straight face. At the time, sort of like the American dairy farmers, but it was the New York dairy farmers, it was a threat to their bottom line because actually it wasn't being marketed as a more expensive butter. It was actually cheaper. And folks with less means could actually buy this butter-like substance for less than what it would cost them to actually get butter. So the New York dairy farmers and other dairy farmers at the time in the late 1800s there saw this as a direct threat in the form of competition. And instead of hunkering down and try to figure out how to make butter cheaper, or, whatever, to be competitive with oleomargarine. Instead of doing that, which to me would be the sensible thing, they ran to government. They ran to government. I'm going to skip down here. In 1882, a meeting at the House Ways and Means Committee, the Vice President of New York State Dairy Association, Professor L.B. Arnold, testified that the availability of margarine had caused producers of creamery butters to increase their quality in order to maintain their competitive advantage. Okay, so what you're saying was when they didn't have a competitor, the quality of their butter wasn't that good, is what he's saying here. If you look at it, you just look at the opposite of what he's actually saying here. This in turn would harm small family-run producers of lower-grade butters as they were out-competed by the larger, better capitalized, and efficient industrial producers of the higher-grade butters. Although the production of margarine was capital-intensive and the profit margins, at least initially, were slim, margarine production boomed during this time. In the late 1870s and early 1880s, the meatpacking houses of Armour and Company in Chicago entered the market as a side business. Now, I skipped over this where they were actually rendering beef fat and getting stuff out of that to actually make this margarine, the oleomargarine originally. And beef fat, if you render it, it produces an oil. Just like lard, if you render that, it produces an oil which coagulates. Okay? And so this was a byproduct of butchering cattle for the most part. But they were really able to capitalize this and really outproduce the actual natural butter producers. And so again, this is another, I put this in here, and I hope you go over and read this whole article. It's a very good article. But this war on margarine is one of the first examples that I can find of corporatism, of corporations running to the government to find shelter in the storm of competition to stifle their competition. So what this Mr. Arnold said was, these butter manufacturers had to create a higher quality of butter, which means the butter before the competition wasn't that high. I just said that, but it's just, people will read that and gloss over that. Don't gloss over that. Do not gloss over that, because this is a perfect example of what competition actually does. Competition forces your competitors to do better. Because if they were already doing well in the first place, an alternative would not be sought. You see what I'm saying? Seems to me, and I haven't done a whole lot of research on this, kind of hard to find out research way back then, but it seems to me from Mr. Arnold's remarks that the dairy farmers could do better on producing a quality butter. But since they didn't have a competitor, what was their incentive to do so? People either bought it or they didn't. But lo and behold, here comes oleomargarine. And it was something people could buy, they could afford. It was cheaper than butter. Actually tasted better, it seems to me, from the remarks I was reading in an article. So the dairy farmers, like I said, they had two choices: either get regulations passed by Congress to stifle the oleomargarine manufacturers, or step up to the plate and do better themselves. Honestly, folks, I think it's that simple. I really do. And so again, hate to say this, but the Obama administration, they never seen a regulation they didn't like. If it was regulating anything to do with capitalism, they loved it. They loved it. And it's funny to me how these folks who love to hate capitalism derive their living from capitalism, or are at least able to protest because of capitalism. You ever notice these protesters, they all got iPhones or Samsung Galaxies or something like that, some smartphone that they use to communicate with each other. They didn't walk to where they got to. They either got a Uber, or they rode a bike, or they drove their own vehicle, or got on a bus. It's all part of capitalism. It's ironic the way these people act that are anti-capitalist, yet without capitalism they wouldn't be where they are today. We wouldn't have the things we have today. Wasn't for competition, we wouldn't have all the things we have today. I want to get down There's a couple of articles I may not get to today here. Let's see, it's 1 o'clock already. I'm already, man, I'm an hour in the show already. I'm not going to get to these today. I may get to these tomorrow. I have one I'd really like you to read by Ryan McMacken over at Mises.org, Net Neutrality and the Problem with Experts. A lot of people out there claim to be an expert, and I never claim to be an expert on this at all. I just know about how government regulations, they don't have an incentive to get it right. So why would you want these folks who do not have a stake in it regulating an industry that they have no incentive to get it right? It just doesn't make sense to me, folks. So that's a good article to go read. Net neutrality strengthens monopolies and invites corruption. And this is again by Ryan McMacken and over at Mises.org. And this is the problem with government regulations. The big boys, the ones that are complaining about Comcast, AT&T, and Verizon, if net neutrality stays in place, there's more of a chance for them to bribe bureaucrats to keep it going, or to strengthen it more against entrants into the field. Some of it might have came in, right? Now, let me real quick here talk about monopolies real quick here. I don't want to bore you and drone on about this. There has never been a natural monopoly in the United States of America, period. There has never been a natural monopoly. Now, my son and I have had this discussion. I go back to Standard Oil, the Rockefellers. At one time, they had in the lower 90 percentile of the oil market in the United States. My son said, well, that's essentially a monopoly. Go look at the definition of a monopoly. A monopoly is 100% control of a market. They didn't have that. They didn't have that. And just saying they're essentially a monopoly doesn't matter, because there was still 8% of the oil being produced by their competitors. Well, lo and behold, people took in their heads, oh, we can't have these monopolies, even though it wasn't a monopoly. Can't have this. So under Teddy Roosevelt, they got the antitrust laws passed. Well, by the time the antitrust laws got passed in the early 1900s, guess where Standard Oil's market share was? It had dropped from, like, I'm going to say 91 or 92% down to 72% of the market. Why? What had changed? The law hadn't been passed yet. The antitrust laws hadn't been passed yet. What had changed? Competitors came in and did it better than Standard Oil did. They delivered a better product, a cheaper product, more readily than Standard Oil was able to. And they started taking away, some people say robbing market share. They weren't robbing it. They were taking away through lawful competition market share from Standard Oil. Ma Bell, they got broke up because of antitrust laws, but they were never a monopoly. Never had a corner on the market. Same way with Microsoft. Antitrust laws were used there. Never was a monopoly. There's no such thing as a naturally created monopoly. And Randolph May over at cnsnews.com has an article there that was posted December 8th of this year. Broadband internet is not a natural monopoly, should be regulated like a public utility. And this is another good article. You really should go in and read about this real quick. And I'm probably going to get into that tomorrow a little bit more. But it's the last mile. ISPs are government-created monopolies. Local governments. Money was passed. Tax breaks were given. So these ISPs would be the only ones offering broadband internet in a city or a town or a county. This is where, I've said this before to some of these net neutrality folks, and they can't get their head wrapped around this. They have to work at the state level and the local level. If they can't get anything done at the local level, I think the states should step in. And I think this is within the purview and the power of the state, of the several states, not the government. I'm not talking about the state as the government. I'm talking about the state as Pennsylvania, Ohio, or something like that, to pass laws that forbid these communities to only allow one actor in the field of broadband. That's how, like, Comcast, AT&T, and Verizon had gotten their monopolies in their little niches, wherever they were at. Even though they're a big company, and this is the, I think this was a genius in a way. They were a big company, but they didn't act like a big company. They were different markets. They treated different ways. And I believe it was Verizon in Wilson, North Carolina that had the broadband. It was junky. They weren't going to expand it. They weren't going to increase bandwidth or anything like that. And then the town and the Wilson, North Carolina, they did through a public-private partnership, which luckily, as far as my research, and I talked about this last week, as far as my research showed, they didn't use any tax dollars to do this. They gave some guarantees to the local bank. They partnered with an internet provider, like a last mile internet provider called Greenlight, or they created Greenlight, and they put high-speed gigabit fiber optic throughout the community, throughout the county, and they're actually starting to expand in other counties. Verizon went to the state and got an injunction against them. And matter of fact, they got a law passed in the state where they couldn't go outside the county, and one of their biggest customers they had was right across the county line, and this company was starting to make great leaps and bounds in profit and productivity because they had a gigabit internet. They could do orders and online stuff, everything like that. And because of corporatism, Verizon got them stopped. But Verizon did not get them stopped in Wilson, North Carolina. Now in Wilson, North Carolina, you still have two choices. You can still get your broadband through Verizon, or you can get it through Greenlight. So they got two choices now. And this is where these net neutrality, these pro-net neutrality folks, they start working on the local state level. The heck with the federal government. The federal government has no constitutional authority to be involved in this to begin with. They have to work at the local and state level. But you know what? And this is the problem with a lot of folks who like regulations. They're too lazy to do that at the local and state level. It's easier for them to get together in a huge group and go to the government level to get these regulations passed. It's easier for them. Because when you're on a state or local level, you're not as big as a group. It's a numbers game. But yet that's where the problem needs to be attacked. We didn't need a government regulation of net neutrality to protect the internet. Regulations to keep it free. The very fact that you're regulating it means it's not free. Sorry. It doesn't work. And in no universe does that work that way. None whatsoever. So I'm telling these folks they need to go to their local government and get this changed. And if they can't get it changed at the local level, go to the state level. Now, is there going to be a lot of opposition? Yes, but you know what? It doesn't mean that you can't get folks from out of state on the internet to help you get the word out, get the message out, and try to educate folks to this is the real problem. The real problem is the local monopolies. If you break up the local monopolies, Comcast will not have a monopoly in any of the markets they serve, period. Net neutrality doesn't do away with the monopolies. The new order does not do away with monopolies. That's something you have to do on the local and state level. And they don't get it. They absolutely do not get it. And like I said, I'm happy with our Service Electric Cable TV. They provide my high-speed internet for me. I'm happy with that. And yeah, do I pay more a month for my cable? Yes. Because of what I do. I try to put out an hour and a half show every day. I'm going to be starting to put out more videos, short videos. Hopefully next week I'll be able to start doing that. I got some more work to do in my office. I'm ashamed to show you the floor behind me. Boxes all over the place. But I'm cleaning out, straightening up, and getting some more things set up in here to where I can be more productive. So, but I need the bandwidth. And should Service Electric give me the bandwidth I use at the same price where someone, might only use, 50 gigabits a month? I'm not even sure where I'm at on my plan. I'm not the highest plan. I'm like 2 plans below going commercial. But if something would happen, and the good Lord blessed me in such a way where my channel would actually grow in leaps and bounds, where I could hire some people, more than likely start off on hiring people online to help me grow, continue to grow the channel and stuff like that. And I would need even more bandwidth. I'm glad that my cable provider has business plans. that would help me out with greater bandwidth that I would need. But again, I've actually heard the argument that there should only be one price for as much bandwidth as you got, as you want. Maybe someday that'll happen. Maybe someday through competition, someone will come up with a system that can do that. But right now we're limited on how much we can do. And you know, if everybody had a gigabit connection, we'd all be able to get more work done, but especially us guys that are on YouTube and, you know, put out podcasts and everything like that. I podcast this show. I don't simulcast anymore, but I upload it as a podcast now. And it goes out to iTunes and Stitcher. I still continue to do that, but I need bandwidth to do that. And again, I understand business. If I use more bandwidth, I should pay for more, period. And if I'm using applications that are using up more bandwidth and they want to charge me more because I'm using up more of that bandwidth, I'm up at the upper tiers because that's all we do. We don't have cable TV. We do not have cable TV because even with cable TV, the bandwidth I need to produce my show live every day like this is where I can do it 5 days a week, is high enough to where if I added TV to it, I couldn't afford it. It'd be well in the, you know, it'd be up close to $140, $150 a month. And we're just not going to pay that. So we stream a lot of our TV. Okay, I'm an internet streamer junkie. But I pay for that bandwidth. It's actually cheaper for me to have the higher bandwidth than it is to have the cable internet and the TV together. It just, you know, that's just the reality of where I'm living at. Now, if they had competition in this area where I could pick and choose, maybe the competition, the Service Electric, would have a cheaper package. You know, give me the same amount of bandwidth I'm getting now for a lesser price. And I'd be foolish not to go over to that, or at least I'd be foolish not to go to Service Electric and say, hey, show them the actual offer from this company as a legitimate offer and say, can you match it? If you can't match it, at least match it. I can't stay with you. And I always approach it, not beat it, at least match it, because if they would at least match it, then I'm not going through the hassle of getting everything switched over to another ISP. See what I'm saying? So if they just at least match it, I'm still ahead of the game. But if they're unwilling to match it, then I'll go over to the other company and, you know, have to change my local email and all that kind of stuff. So I just want to end the show on that. There's some other things in here. I do have the draft order for restoring internet freedom. It's a PDF that's put out by the Free State Foundation. The one, and this is, I talked about this a little bit earlier in my monologue. Broadband investment slowed by $5.6 billion since the open internet order by Michael Horney over to Free State Foundation. And they used comprehensive studies of the whole industry, not just pointing out one or two ISPs. Oh, we invested a couple $1 million. Well, see, investment hasn't slowed under net neutrality, and that's just that's not out and out lie, you know. So you're going to hear that a lot on some of these videos if you're watching net neutrality videos. And I'll put the link up to the Humanist radio over there, or Humanist. Is it the Humanist Report? I think it is. I'll have the I'll have it up in the at the end of the show there in the show notes page when you go over and look at this. So and just this hour, like I said, this hour went by, and I'm going to spend the next couple days. I know it might get boring, but I'm going to spend the next couple days on net neutrality. Okay. This has been the Dan Clemens Show. I'm your host, Dan Clemens, your constitutional warrior, fighting for your right just to be an American. Remember, if you aim at nothing, you hit it every time. Have a great rest of the day. God bless. And if you like the show, hit a thumbs up or thumbs down. Hit the subscribe button and the notification button over there if you're not already done so. And as always, I am looking for patrons on Patreon or over PayPal for, even if it's $1 a month. $1 a month helps me more than no dollar a month, right? So anything you can do to help me to grow this show, I would appreciate it. We'll see you tomorrow at noon.